From the earliest days of seafaring, humans have been both enchanted and terrified by the ocean. To some, it's a symbol of opportunity, a vast frontier full of trade, adventure, and discovery. But to others, it's an endless abyss hiding ancient horrors beneath its rolling surface. Speak to any experienced mariner, and they'll tell you, the sea is not just a force of nature. It's a realm of mystery, sometimes bordering on the supernatural. As the number of eyewitness reports from across centuries grows, it's harder and harder to dismiss these stories as mere superstition. From vanished crews and drifting ghost ships to encounters with creatures no scientist can classify, there's something about the ocean that defies explanation and demands respect. Beneath the shimmering top layer of the sea lies a world far more alien than outer space. Light quickly fades into blackness. Pressure reaches bone-crushing levels. And in this realm live beings unlike anything on land. Ancient civilizations viewed the ocean not just as water, but as a primal force. One as unpredictable and powerful as the storm or fire. The Mesopotamians spoke of Tiamat, a chaos goddess of the sea, both creator and destroyer. The Norse feared sea serpents and monsters that could pull entire ships under. And today, even with all our technological advancements, the vast majority of the deep sea remains uncharted. It's no wonder, then, that some of the most chilling legends originate from the ocean. From the legendary Kraken with its titanic arms dragging ships to the deep, to unexplained lights that dance above and beneath the waves, the sea has long inspired tales that border on the unbelievable. Old navigational charts used to warn sailors, with the phrase, "Here be monsters," often accompanied by terrifying drawings of strange creatures waiting in the depths. As early as 500 BC, the Carthaginian navigator Himilco wrote of strange marine beasts lurking just below the waterline. In 1734, Danish missionary Hans Egede described seeing a sea creature off Greenland that was longer than his ship, with massive, wrinkled flanks and enormous fins. Today, science acknowledges the presence of colossal sea life. Blue whales, massive, squid, and leatherback turtles as long as a small car. It's not hard to see how these creatures, seen dimly through mist or in the flickering light of oil lamps, could evolve into legends. But then there are stories that science struggles to explain. Tales of vessels found adrift with no one aboard, of ghostly figures seen walking the ocean's surface, and of mysterious sounds that seem to come from something alive. One such case occurred in 2007, when an Australian yacht known as the Kaz II was found near the Great Barrier Reef, drifting in perfect condition, food still on the table, laptop open, personal belongings untouched, yet the entire crew had vanished. The incident mirrored the earlier case of the MV Juita, found in the Pacific in the 1950s, also perfectly intact, but with all 25 people on board gone without a trace. Skeptics try to chalk these vanishings up to foul weather or mechanical issues. But those who've spent their lives at sea often tell a different story, not just of bad luck, but of something else. Crewmates whisper of strange lights darting through the sky or just below the water's surface, moving in ways no aircraft or submarine should. Others describe seeing pale, humanoid shapes floating out at sea, always vanishing before you can reach them, leaving only ripples and an overwhelming sense of dread. And these aren't just sailors' bar stories anymore. Today, with online forums and social media, more and more mariners are anonymously sharing their encounters. Encounters they know can't be explained away with logic. One of the most unsettling maritime encounters of the late 20th century took place in the cold, empty expanse of the North Atlantic. It involved a cargo vessel named the Pacific Dawn, a massive freighter that, like so many others, quietly carried goods between continents. For most of the crew, the job was monotonous, long stretches of routine and open water. But in the late 1990s, one voyage would shatter the illusion of safety and leave the crew forever changed. The event was first shared online in 2007 by a man named Ian Michaels, one of the ship's crew. According to his account, it began in the early morning hours during a calm, uneventful stretch of the journey. He had stepped out on deck to enjoy his coffee, the sky just beginning to shift from dark blue to pale dawn. Then, without warning, the brightness of the rising sun began to dim, swallowed by a wall of thick, gray fog rolling in from the horizon. At first, there was no panic. Fog is common at sea, usually formed by the collision of warm air and cold water. But this fog wasn't ordinary. Michaels described it as crawling across the ocean like a living thing, tendrils of mist curling toward the ship's hull. Within minutes, it had completely engulfed the vessel. With visibility reduced to nearly zero, standard protocol kicked in. The ship slowed to a crawl to avoid accidents. Other crew members soon joined Michaels on deck, each drawn by the eerie silence that had replaced the usual ocean sounds. According to Michaels, the fog was so dense it felt like it was pressing against them, not just blocking vision, but absorbing sound. The usual creak of the hull, the rhythmic churn of the waves, even the hum of the engine, all of it seemed muted, as if the ship had been pulled into another world. Then came the first sound, a low, resonating rumble that vibrated through the steel under their feet. At first, Michaels assumed they had scraped a submerged reef or encountered engine trouble. But the ocean beneath them was 2 miles deep. There were no rocks, no sandbars, and the engines were running just fine. The sound repeated, this time, louder, closer, and accompanied by something else, the sound of water moving. Not the splashing of fish or dolphins, but the slow, deliberate displacing of thousands of gallons, as if something enormous was swimming just beneath the surface. Michaels realized then that they were not alone in the fog. Roughly 5 of the 18 crew were out on deck at the time, but visibility was so poor that Michaels couldn't see even 10 meters in any direction. He felt rooted in place, afraid that if he moved, he'd lose his way back to the bridge. More sounds followed, deep growls that came from multiple directions. Then more splashes. At times, the ship shuddered slightly, as if something had brushed against the hull. According to Michaels, the sound wasn't quite animal, but not mechanical either. It existed in a strange in-between, as if something intelligent yet unfamiliar was circling the ship. For nearly 15 minutes, the Pacific Dawn crept forward through the fog, the ship creaking under the weight of silence and tension. No one spoke. Even the captain remained silent, watching the thick mist as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. Then, almost as quickly as it had arrived, the fog began to thin. Rays of sunlight pierced through the gray veil, and the sky slowly reclaimed its color. As the mist vanished, so too did the strange sounds. And just like that, the world felt normal again. The crew, dazed and silent, returned to their duties without a word. Not even Michael spoke of it, not at first. In fact, no one brought it up until days later, when one crewman asked to review the ship's sonar data. But the logs showed nothing unusual. No large sea creatures, no underwater structures. Nothing. At all. Whatever had circled the Pacific Dawn that morning left no trace. Only a memory the entire crew shared but couldn't explain. And so, like many tales born at sea, the incident was quietly buried. Unspoken but never forgotten. The Gulf of Alaska is one of the most treacherous stretches of ocean on the planet. Known for its violent winds, monstrous waves, and freezing temperatures, it has claimed countless ships and lives over the decades. Mariners have come to refer to part of this region as the Alaska Triangle, where strange vanishings and unexplained disasters occur far more often than anywhere else. But, despite the danger, the region remains crucial. It's a hotbed for the fishing industry, a gateway for global exports, and home to countless voyages through some of the most unpredictable waters known to man. In the early 2000s, a particularly harrowing incident took place aboard a retrofitted LCM-8, a 75-foot landing craft originally built for the Vietnam War and now used in the Alaskan seafood trade. These sturdy vessels are often tasked with hauling fish or towing barges to processing plants scattered across the rugged Alaskan coast. This specific journey required the LCM-8 to tow a massive 220-foot barge from Whittier through the Aleutian Islands and into Bristol Bay. On board was a 23-year-old fisherman named George, who had been working the sea since he was 17. By then, George was well acquainted with the brutal conditions of Alaskan waters. But something about this assignment unsettled him from the start. The vessel, already slow by design, could barely crawl when burdened by the barge. At full effort, it managed just 4 knots, meaning the crew was essentially creeping through some of the most dangerous waters in the world. As they approached the Aleutian Peninsula, they spotted a dark wall of storm clouds building on the horizon. Knowing they had no chance of outrunning it, the captain directed the vessel toward a nearby island to seek shelter. But nature had other plans. Strong currents and vicious winds pulled the LCM-8 away from its safe position, dragging it back into open water. As the storm intensified, the barge behind them heaved wildly, eventually tearing loose and ripping a gaping hole in the landing craft's engine room. They had no choice but to detach the barge, mark its last position by radar, and hope they could recover it after the storm passed. But the storm didn't pass. For the next 3 days, the crew battled towering swells and howling winds. The vessel pitched and rolled so violently at times that capsizing seemed inevitable. The men worked in shifts to pump water out of the lower compartments, clinging to rails and bulkheads just to stay upright. Then, on the third night, something happened that terrified them more than the storm itself. Around 3 a.m., a deafening boom echoed through the ship. It wasn't thunder, and it didn't sound like a wave striking the hull. The entire vessel shuddered from bow to stern. At first, the crew feared they had struck floating debris or another boat. But after inspecting the ship, there were no breaches, no flooding, no signs of collision. And yet, something was very wrong. All of their electrical systems had suddenly failed. The deck lights went black. The radio died. Even their navigation systems had gone silent. One by one, all the breakers had tripped. The ship was now floating blind, in pitch darkness, during one of the worst storms any of them had seen. They waited, helpless, until morning. By sunrise, the seas had miraculously calmed. The winds died down, and the sun broke through the clouds. But what should have been a moment of relief turned into one of horror. The ship's mast, a solid 4-inch thick steel beam that supported their antennas and lights, was gone. Not broken off jaggedly, but bent clean at a right angle, sheared 25 feet above the waterline as if it had been gripped and twisted by a giant hand. Even the reinforced steel plate connecting it to the deckhouse had been warped. The crew was stunned. Every sailor aboard knew that no storm, not even a hurricane, could snap a solid steel mast like that. George and the others were convinced something had reached out of the sea and torn it off. But as always, the code of the sea ruled the response. No wild speculation, no panic. They located the barge, reattached it, and limped into port a week later. By then, news had already spread. Their emergency signals had never been received. As far as authorities knew, they were dead. To this day, no one can explain how that mast was destroyed. The incident caused several of the crew to leave the fishing industry for good. George never forgot it. Not the storm, not the silence, and certainly not the mast that seemed to vanish into thin air. Some of the most mysterious disappearances at sea involve not whole crews or massive ships, but solitary sailors, experienced mariners who vanish into the deep without leaving behind even a footprint. One such case involved Isidoro Arias, a seasoned Spanish sailor and skilled pilot who had spent nearly his entire life navigating the sea. At the age of 49, he was finally living his lifelong dream, to sail around the world solo. After years of preparation, he departed from Malaga, Spain, in March 2001 aboard a sturdy 47-foot sailboat he named Islero. For almost 2 years, the journey went smoothly. Isidoro kept in constant touch with family, friends, and followers through satellite phone calls and an online blog, where he detailed his progress and the beauty and challenges of ocean life. He was calm, capable, and cautious, not one to take reckless risks. Then came March 22, 2003, just 6 days before he was expected to return home. That day, Isidoro sent 2 alarming messages. One was through his satellite phone, the other via the internet. He explained that his engine had failed, leaving him drifting under heavy winds and thick cloud cover. More concerning, however, was what he said next. He wrote that a whale and its calf had been following him for hours, not swimming nearby in a natural way, but trailing his boat deliberately, almost like they were tracking him. As someone who had encountered marine wildlife countless times, Isidoro found their behavior deeply unsettling. This would be the last coherent update he ever gave. 3 days later, on March 25th, Isidoro's son Mario received a brief, cryptic email that left him shaken. Alarmed, He tried to call his father immediately. When the line finally connected, he was stunned by the voice on the other end. It was Isidoro, but something was very wrong. His tone was unsteady. His speech was fragmented, erratic, as if he was trying to describe something too disturbing to make sense of. He told Mario that something was climbing onto his boat at night. Not animals, not people. He described small, humanoid figures that moved in strange, unnatural ways. He could never quite see them clearly. They stayed just beyond the reach of the lights. But he could feel them watching, waiting. That phone call was the last contact anyone ever had with Isidoro Arias. Although his satellite signal remained active for a while, every call afterward went unanswered. Desperate for help, Mario contacted fellow sailor Rafael del Castillo, who activated a distress network and called on ships in the region to keep watch for Isidoro's vessel. No one saw a thing. Then, on May 2, 2003, a French fishing boat spotted a sailboat drifting aimlessly in the Gulf of Guinea, off the coast of Nigeria. It was the Islero. They hailed it, but got no response. Eventually, they boarded it, and what they found only deepened the mystery. There was no sign of struggle. The cabin was tidy. Food stores were untouched. Personal belongings were all in place, including Isidoro's passport and ID. Nothing appeared to be stolen or destroyed. It was as if he had just stepped out for a moment. The only thing missing was the lifeboat, a small inflatable dinghy. For a brief moment, investigators considered the possibility that he had chosen to abandon ship in a panic. But then they found the engine for the dinghy still mounted on the main boat. Without it, the raft would be virtually useless. And then came the most chilling discovery of all. Like many sailors, Isidoro had kept a logbook. His final entry, scrawled in shaky handwriting, was just one line. Something is climbing up the hull. That was it. No further notes. No explanations. Just one sentence. The final record of a man who had survived 2 years at sea, only to disappear in calm waters hundreds of miles from the nearest shore. Whatever happened aboard the Islero remains a mystery. His family insists he was not prone to superstition and not someone who would ever abandon his vessel unless he had no other choice. His belongings were untouched. The ship was intact. The sea was calm. Only the man was missing. 3 separate stories. 3 very different settings. Yet they all share a common thread. An encounter with something unknown in the vast emptiness of the ocean. Something that defies logic, challenges science, and refuses to leave behind clear answers. In the case of the Pacific Dawn, the incident in the fog appears to be what researchers call a shared paranormal event. Nearly 20 people aboard that ship experienced the same sensations, the same vibrations, the same noises, the same feeling that something enormous and unseen was circling them. And yet, none of them spoke of it. Not at first, not even among themselves. Some scientists speculate that mass hallucinations can be triggered by stress, sleep deprivation, or environmental factors, and certainly, dense fog can distort acoustics and play tricks on the senses. But Ian Michaels insisted the crew wasn't under pressure. The voyage had been going smoothly. There was no reason for the fear they felt, other than what they heard in no sonar records, no visual proof. Just memories, shared, unspoken, and chilling. With the Alaskan LCM-8, the story was different. It wasn't based on what people saw or imagined, but on cold, physical evidence. A steel mast, 4 inches thick, bolted into reinforced metal, had been torn off as if by a force too strong and precise to be wind or wave. And while rogue waves are known to damage vessels, they typically leave behind chaos, flooding, debris, shattered hulls. This ship remained otherwise intact. Only the mast had been destroyed. What kind of force could reach out in the dark during a storm and tear through reinforced steel without capsizing the boat? And then there's Isidoro Arias, the solo sailor whose final days were filled with unease. Some might point to stress, isolation, or even illness. Conditions at sea can trigger dehydration, hypothermia, and confusion. But Isidoro had just completed nearly 2 years at sea without issue. Why would he suddenly break down in the final stretch? Some have suggested a fevered hallucination, possibly triggered by malaria or poison. Yet no signs of contamination were found. His supplies were untouched, his water clean, and his logbook, filled with steady, clear entries, only turned erratic at the very end. And what of his final statement? Something is climbing up the hull. Not a hallucination. Not a metaphor. A direct observation, written in fear. Reinforced by the phone call with his son, where he described small, unnatural beings that came aboard under cover of night. He was afraid, but not of the whale he'd seen. He believed the whales were following him because of something else. Something they sensed too. What could those humanoid figures have been? Some have theorized that he mistook underwater craft for sea life. That he may have crossed paths with a USO, an unidentified submerged object. In fact, reports of strange lights beneath the water go back centuries. Even Christopher Columbus wrote in his journal about mysterious glowing objects darting through the sea. Those who study UFO phenomena, the ocean is a perfect hiding place. Its crushing depths and endless isolation offer an ideal location for secret activity, whether earthly or otherwise.